Hi, I'm Hugh from Company The Staple. We're a 14th century living history group making videos about handcrafts and history. In this video, I'll show you how to make a fine awl for medieval leather sewing using simple tools and materials. This kind of awl is best for sewing small items like leather cases, knife sheaths and purses. The design I'll be demonstrating is based on this Extant awl that's on display in Schloss Gottorf in northern Germany. For the handle, I'm going to be using an 18mm hardwood dowel. Mark a length for the handle that's approximately as wide as your hand. I'm marking all the way around the dowel to give myself the best chance at cutting the end off square. Cut the handle to the length you've marked using your preferred saw. In this case I'm using a medieval style frame saw. After the handle's cut to length, remove all of the pointy bits on the corners, otherwise it could be uncomfortable to use once you've finished it. You could use a chisel like I am, or you could use a rasp, a file, or even a bench grinder. Once you've finished smoothing off all of the corners on the handle, it should be about 8 to 10 centimetres long, depending on the size of your hand. Select a drill bit that's the same size as the shank of the blade you're going to be using. In my case, it's a 1mm drill for a 1mm blade. Drill a hole in the end of the handle, about half the length of the blade, in this case about 25mm. I'm using a small drill upside down on the bench to keep it stable, but a drill press would probably be better for this job. Next, put a slight taper onto the end of the handle. I've exaggerated the taper slightly more than the Extant piece because I find it makes it a bit easier for sewing fine projects. I like to do this step with a chisel, but as with the other shaping steps, you can use whatever other tools you like, such as a file, a rasp, a bench grinder, or some other equivalent. The key part of this is just making sure that when you're done shaping, that the whole result's quite smooth when you finish. Once you've carved it to a shape you're happy with, if it's feeling a bit too rough or splintery in your hands, then you might want to consider doing another smoothing step before you call the handle finished. If you want a super smooth finish on your handle, you can work your way through a series of sandpaper grits from coarse through to medium through to fine. This step's not strictly necessary, but the smoother it is, the more comfortable it'll be in your hand when you're using it. I'll be using a 1mm thick needle for the blade in this awl, which means it'll be a super fine sewing awl. Cut the eye off the needle with a set of clippers. This will make it a bit easier when you're installing the blade into the handle. If you own a vise, you don't need to worry about this step. But if you don't, then drill a hole in a block of wood that's slightly bigger than your awl handle. Apply a coating of glue to the blunt end of the awl blade. I'm using a wood glue, so I've got to make sure to shake it up before I use it. I find it's easiest just to dip the blunt end into the nozzle to make sure I get a good coating of glue all around. Push the end of the awl blade into the hole in the handle. If the hole you've drilled is the right size for this blade, you won't be able to get it very far in by pushing with your fingers. This is where the scrap of wood comes in handy. So you can either mount the handle into a block of wood with some scrap wedges, or you can use a vise. Next, grab onto the awl blade with a pair of pliers, and then hammer on the joint of the pliers, making sure you grip them very tightly, and make sure you're hammering vertically. This will hammer the awl blade into the handle. When you finish this step, there should be about 20 to 25mm worth of blade showing. So now that we've got the needle mounted in the handle, what we've got here as an awl blade is something which is polished, it has a taper, but we need to put a chisel point on it. And so we're interested in what's happening at the tip. So if we look at that a bit closer, we've got our 1mm wide needle blown up in size, and it tapers from that 1mm down to a bullet point over 7.5mm. So on this one we're talking probably from about my thumbnail to the end. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off the end maybe 0.5mm to 1mm, and we're going to take it off at an angle so that we're left with a flat surface. And that flat surface is called a bevel, and at the end of that bevel will be a chisel point. So it'll look something like this once it's taken off. You'll only be able to see a very small amount of flat surface. It wouldn't matter whether this needle was round section or square section or oval. and you find that there are historic awls that are all of those profiles, and that this chisel point will work on any of them and will make them very effective. And one of the reasons why you want a chisel point, aside from the fact that a blade followed by a taper will go through easier, is that it's very easy to maintain one of these chisel points, because you can do exactly the same process that we're going to do next in order to maintain it once it goes blunt. To grind the bevel, we're going to use sandpaper against a flat surface. And so what we're aiming to do is to grind the very tip at a consistent angle of about 30 to 40 degrees. The specific angle itself doesn't really matter. Just know that the shallower you make the angle, the more quickly your awl is going to blunt. If you make it too obtuse, raising it up too far, then it'll be a bit harder to push through the leather. So somewhere in between here and here is pretty good. So what we're going to do is hold it firmly in the hand, lock all of the muscles of your hand, try and keep as much of your hand in contact with the flat surface as possible, and using your index finger to hold pressure, about 10 drags along the paper on 100 grit should grind a decent bevel. Just a couple more for good luck. Now that we've ground the bevel, we're going to polish the bevel. So I'm going to keep my hand locked the whole way through this process. I'm going to move to 240 grit paper. Then 400 grit. And then 600 grit. You can see as I rotate that it's a chisel point on the end. On it. This is a 6mm compressed sole leather hide, and with minimal force I can put holes through this quite comfortably. I can go straight through this way, and I'm only using 2 fingers of pressure. I'm not even putting my hand behind. And this is just 3mm leather, and with only 2 fingers on this I can comfortably punch this through all day long, as well as doing fine work going in just under the skin and out the edge, doing tunnel stitching. Both grinding the bevel and polishing it is about how you hold the awl. So I like to hold it with my index finger on the top to keep the right tip pressure. If you're pressing too hard, you'll bend the awl blade, and if you're not pressing enough, you won't grind anything, so it's pretty easy to figure that one out. And then for the rest of my hand, I'm trying to keep as much of my hand along this line, fingertips and side of hand, in contact with the bench. And that by doing this and locking the muscles in my hand, including gripping my thumb against the awl to hold it in place, means that as I'm dragging it up and down, the angle between the awl blade and the bench is going to be consistent. So if you watch the awl as I'm moving it up and down along the bench, even if I pick my hand up and move it around, as soon as I put it back against the bench where I've had the sandpaper, that angle is going to always be the same. And when I have a consistent grind on the bevel, it means that the tip at the very end of it is going to be a very sharp blade. The top view of this shows you that I'm not putting my hand onto the paper. The edge of my third finger is at the edge of where the paper is, which means that I'm never going to be grinding my fingertips while I'm doing this. If you find that you're having trouble putting the awl through the leather, then all you need to do is to repeat this same process of getting into the right position, trying to find where your bevel was before, and then grinding it, starting at some of the finer grits. So I'd say starting at 240 grit and then doing 400 and then 600 in order to sharpen it. If you can't find where the bevel is at the very end, by feel or by eye, don't worry about it. Just start again at the 100 grit, grind a new bevel, and do the whole thing again from scratch. It only takes you about a minute in total. Once you've got your awl sharpened, you can use a scrap of leather to make a simple cover for it. So you have to make sure that the leather is going to be a bit wider than the awl handle so that you can easily pull it off once it's on there, and you need to make sure that it's longer than the awl blade because we're going to be putting the awl blade all the way into the cover, and you want to make sure it doesn't poke out the end. In order to make the cover, get your scrap of leather, put the awl in from the edge, and simply push it in through the middle of the leather until it's all the way in. You want to get the leather pressed up against the end of the handle. So you notice that it's going through the middle, it's not coming out either side. Make sure you don't stab yourself while you're doing it. Once it's done, it fits on quite firmly. Now you'll notice it's not too hard to put it back in, but if you happen to bend it while you're putting the awl back in and that the tip comes out like this, it's easy enough to fix up. All you got to do is back the awl out, straighten up the leather, and then push the awl back in again all the way. If you can see any of the metal sticking out, you can simply back it off and then put it back into the cover. And these make great little travel covers for your awls.
And that's all there is to it. So thanks for watching. Go forth and make awls, and have fun using them making projects.